everyone. I'm Bobby Thomas, and today I want to share with you a story I never thought I'd tell. It's like a nightmare I lived through, a story of love betrayal and how a foolish habit of my wife Susan destroyed everything we had built. If you've ever been deceived or are just curious about how someone can rise from the ashes of a broken heart, stay with me. This isn't just my story, it's a lesson about trust, truth, and the strength to move forward. I promise you the story will make you think, and maybe, just maybe, it'll help you avoid the mistakes I didn't see coming. Let's dive in. 3 years ago, I stood in the lobby of an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago, waiting to meet a client. My eyes scanned the crowd, and then I saw her, Susan, my ex-wife. She was sitting next to a middle-aged man, slightly overweight but clearly wealthy. His suit, the way he held his wine glass, all screamed money. Susan was radiant, as if she were living her dream. Seeing her, I felt a wave of emotion surge, but also a hint of relief. It was the first time I'd seen her since the divorce, and all the memories of what happened 3 years prior came flooding back like a tidal wave. Let me take you back to when everything began to crumble. I once thought I had a perfect life. Susan and I had been married for 10 years, living in a beautiful house in the suburbs of Naperville, Illinois. I worked in financial consulting, often traveling for business, but always made time for her. We had date nights, weekend getaways, and I thought we were happy. But love, as I learned the hard way, can blind you to the truth. It all started on a fateful evening when I had to go to Albany, New York to meet a client. The trip was planned as an overnight, but just an hour after I left home, the client called and canceled the meeting because his car broke down. I decided to head back home early to surprise Susan with a romantic dinner. I pictured her smiling when she saw me, us dining together, sipping wine and enjoying a night just for the two of us. But fate had other plans. As I drove into our street, I sensed something was off. There were 3 unfamiliar cars parked in our driveway, a BMW, a Mercedes, and a luxury SUV. I thought maybe Susan was hosting a gathering with friends. She often invited a few girlfriends over when I was away, so I wasn't too concerned. I parked on the street, walked into the house, and immediately my heart stopped. On the living room floor were 4 sets of clothes, not dresses or high heels from her girlfriends, but men's trousers, dress shirts, and ties. Then I heard Susan scream from upstairs. It wasn't a cry for help, but a sound I knew all too well. A sound I thought was reserved for me in our private moments. I stood there, paralyzed, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to run upstairs, but another part knew I had to face the truth. I slowly climbed the stairs, each step feeling like 1,000 pounds. When I reached the bedroom door, I looked through the frame and saw a scene that shattered my entire world. Susan was there with 3 men I didn't know, except for one, Jeff Davis, her boss at the real estate company. I don't want to go into details, but let's just say it was a sight no husband should ever witness. Jeff was even laughing, telling Susan she was a great gift for 2 of his important clients. I felt like a knife had been plunged into my heart. My wife, the woman I loved and trusted, wasn't just cheating, but was being used as a tool to please her boss's business partners. I wanted to scream to break everything, but I didn't. Instead, I quietly went to my home office, grabbed an old video camera from the shelf. The battery had just enough juice for a few minutes. I didn't want to make a full movie, just enough evidence for my lawyer. I returned to the bedroom door, recording Susan's face, clearly along with each man. I could only stomach about 5 minutes before nausea and pain forced me to stop. I went downstairs, sat in my office, and tried to calm down. That was the moment I realized my marriage was over. But I didn't just sit there and cry. I grabbed a gun from the safe, not for anything violent, but to feel secure in case they caused trouble. I'm not an aggressive guy, but at that moment I just wanted to protect myself. Then I went to the living room, grabbed wallets and car keys from the pile of clothes. I went outside and used a box cutter to slash the tires of all their cars, including Susan's. When I was done, I smiled not out of joy, but because I knew I was about to make them pay. I went back inside, grabbed Susan's phone from the nightstand I'd seen while recording. I called her pretending I was still in Albany. "Hey, honey, I'm coming home early. Want to go out for dinner?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside I was raging. Susan answered, her voice trembling clearly, panicked. "Yeah, great, love. I'll get ready." She hung up quickly, and I knew what was coming. Minutes later, 4 people, Susan and the 3 guys, came rushing downstairs, barely dressed, scrambling to put on clothes. Susan threw on a coat and ran outside with them. If she hadn't been so frantic, she might have noticed my car parked right in front of the house. Right then, I slammed the front door shut and locked it. Susan turned back, saw me through the window, and started begging. "Bobby, please open the door. We need to talk," but I didn't want to hear it. I called 911, reporting that someone was trying to break into my house. Within minutes, the police arrived. I waited for them to question Susan, then stepped outside and told the officer, "These people assaulted my wife. I want them all arrested." The 3 guys immediately protested, shouting that they were invited, that Susan wanted it. All eyes turned to Susan. She lowered her head, her voice shaking. I invited them. No one assaulted me. I did this willingly." I wasn't surprised, but hearing her admit it still felt like a punch to the gut. The police said if Susan was willing, there wasn't much they could do. I asked them to call a cab for her, saying Susan wasn't allowed in the house tonight. One of the guys called a taxi as they discovered their tires were slashed. They tried accusing me of taking their wallets and keys, but I just shrugged and told the police I didn't know anything about it. Susan tried stepping onto the porch to talk to me, but I cut her off. "You destroyed my heart, Susan. From now on, I'll call you the betrayer. And don't ever expect forgiveness." I turned back inside, locked the door, leaving her standing there sobbing. When I went back to the bedroom, the smell of betrayal still lingered in the air. I couldn't stand it. I dragged the mattress out to the front yard, dismantled the bed frame, and tossed every piece outside. I grabbed trash bags, gathered all of Susan's clothes and belongings from the living room, and piled them in the yard. Then I went to the living room, checked her computer. What I found was worse than what I'd seen in the bedroom. There were emails, photos, and videos, all showing Susan had been living a secret life for years. One email from Susan to her best friend, Sarah, nearly broke me. She wrote, "Bobby's loyal, but stupid. He's not attractive anymore, fat and scruffy. I want a rich man easy to control who'll do anything I want. I'm done with Bobby, and I deserve better." Reading those words, I felt like I wasn't human anymore. I had loved her deeply, but to her, I was just a fool to be deceived. I kept digging and found 7 or 8 DVDs hidden at the bottom of a drawer in the living room. These discs showed Susan with her friend Sarah at her house, with her tennis coach, and even with Jeff and Jeff's boss Bill Evans right in the company's boardroom. I couldn't watch them all. Each scene was another stab wound, but I knew I needed to keep them. I copied everything from Susan's computer, emails, photos, videos, and prepared a large envelope for my lawyer, Ted Worth. Ted was my best friend from college and a brilliant lawyer. The next morning I called him, requesting an urgent meeting. When I arrived at Ted's office in downtown Chicago, I handed him the envelope with the disc, Susan's phone, and the video I'd recorded last night. I told him everything from the moment I walked into the house, to the scene in the bedroom and what I found on Susan's computer. Ted listened without interrupting, but I could see him thinking. When I finished, he asked Bobby, "Do you want to reconcile with Susan? Is there any chance to save this?" I looked at him, and for the first time I felt clarity. "Ted, if you saw those videos, read those emails, you'd leave Katie in a heartbeat. I want a divorce, and I want them to pay. I'm not walking away quietly." Ted nodded, and we started planning. He suggested suing Susan's company targeting Jeff and Bill for workplace misconduct. We'd also sue the Ace Tennis Club where Susan had lessons with her coach, Tony. And finally, we'd go after Jeff's 2 clients, the guys at my house last night. Ted said with the evidence we had, especially the boardroom video, we could make them pay dearly. Just then my phone rang. It was Bill Evans, Jeff's boss, wanting to meet to sort out last night's mess. I agreed to meet him that afternoon, but I told Ted I didn't want to negotiate lightly. Ted smiled. "Don't worry, Bobby. We'll play hardball." Before meeting Bill, Ted and I prepared a portable DVD player and printed a few stills from the video. Clear shots showing Bill and Jeff with Susan in the boardroom. I knew this meeting wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. When we walked into Bill's office at the top of the company's building, I felt a surge of adrenaline. His office was lavish with photos of him with politicians and framed awards on the walls. But I wasn't impressed. I introduced Ted, and Bill seemed annoyed that I brought a lawyer. "I thought this was a private meeting, Bob," he said. I replied, "Anything you say to me, you can say to Ted." Bill reluctantly agreed and started apologizing for the trouble Jeff and Susan caused. He said he saw Susan like a daughter and wanted to help everyone move past this. Ted cut him off. "You mean you like incest, Mr. Evans?" Bill was stunned, and before he could respond, Ted placed the DVD player on the table and handed Jeff, who had just been called in, a stack of photos. The photos clearly showed Jeff and Bill with Susan in the boardroom. Jeff went pale and Bill stammered, "Jeff, you were stupid enough to record this and leak it." Ted smiled. "Mr. Evans, here's how this works. First, Susan keeps her job. Bobby thinks she'll need it. Second, Jeff leaves. And third, we want a financial offer that doesn't insult our intelligence. We'll review your first offer in 5 business days, and if we're not satisfied, we'll see you in court." Before Bill or Jeff could respond, Ted hit play. The video started clearly showing what happened in the boardroom. Bill's jaw dropped and Jeff looked down. I could see Bill calculating how to save his business, his reputation, his family. Ted packed up the player and photos and we left, leaving Bill yelling into the intercom demanding Susan come immediately. Outside, Ted explained divide and conquer Bobby. If we turn Bill and Jeff against each other, they'll be easier to negotiate with. Our next meeting was with Harry Ryle, the owner of the Ace Tennis Club. Ted had reviewed the club's video and found a key detail. Harry appeared in one scene alongside a crowd in the men's locker room. He didn't just know about Tony's behavior, he participated. When we arrived at Harry's office, he was hostile from the start. What 2 adults do in private is their business. "Don't waste my time," he said, even mocking me. "If you couldn't keep your wife satisfied, don't blame me." Ted didn't flinch. He placed the DVD player on the desk and played the video. Harry went pale when he saw himself on screen. Ted said, "Harry, you knew this was happening at your club and you let it continue. When this gets out, your male members, the ones who pay fees, will want to know if their wives were taken advantage of. We'll subpoena everyone in that locker room that day, and I bet they won't be happy." Ted demanded a serious financial offer, and we left, leaving Harry muttering about calling back. That week, things moved fast. Bill Evans offered $2.7 million to keep Susan and avoid a scandal. Jeff was fired after stupidly handing over all his videos to Bill, keeping nothing to leverage. Jeff's two clients, the guys at my house, each paid $1 million to avoid publicity. Harry Riel initially refused, but after we sued and the locker room video leaked, he lost the case and paid $3 million. His club lost half its members and his reputation was ruined. I gave Susan the house and car, as she'd always dreamed, but I didn't have to pay alimony since we had no kids. I only saw her twice in court, and both times I greeted her as the betrayer. She cried, but I didn't care anymore. I'd lost all feelings for her. With the money from the lawsuits, I transformed my life. I lost weight, fixed my knee injury from my baseball days, and started caring about my appearance. I bought expensive suits, got a sharp haircut, and hit the gym regularly. I was no longer the fat, scruffy Bobby Susan had mocked. 3 years later, at that restaurant, I faced Susan one last time. I called her the betrayer, and when the man next to her writer objected, I asked to speak with him privately. I asked him 3 questions. Does Susan still go to Sarah's on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Does she still take tennis lessons on Saturdays? And have you ever checked under the bottom drawer in the living room? Peter answered, thinking I'd mixed up the days, but I handed him a copy of Susan's old email, the one where she wrote about wanting a rich, controllable man. I told him I was in your shoes once, and I don't want anyone to go through what I did. Check that drawer, and you'll understand. Peter read the email, wrote a note, and left without a word. I left the note on Susan's table and walked out of the restaurant. When I looked back, Susan was sitting alone reading the email and Peter's note. She was sobbing, her face pale. I felt a twinge of pity, but also relief. I had warned Peter not for revenge, but to help him avoid the pain I'd endured. My story isn't just about betrayal. It's about recognizing your worth, using the truth to reclaim justice, and not letting someone else's habits define you. Susan may have destroyed our marriage, but I built a better life. And if you're watching this video, I want you to remember one thing. You are stronger than you think. If someone betrays you, gather evidence, stand up and rewrite your own story. Don't let someone else's foolish habits destroy your dreams. Thank you for listening to my story. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Have you ever been through something similar? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories, life lessons, and ways to overcome adversity. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. The feeling of leaving the restaurant that night was surreal. I stepped onto the Chicago streets, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement after a rain. Part of me felt relieved, like I'd shed a burden that had weighed on my shoulders for 3 years. But another part was restless, wondering if Peter would actually check that bottom drawer in his living room. I knew Susan too well. She was a creature of habit, and her habits were like a loop that never ended. But my story didn't stop there. What happened next surprised me even more than what I'd gone through that fateful night 3 years ago. A few days after the restaurant encounter, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, thinking it might be Susan trying to reach me, but I picked up anyway. The voice on the other end was shaky, but clearly a man's. "Bobby, Thomas, this is Peter from the restaurant the other night. We need to talk." My heart raced. I hadn't expected him to call, and I certainly didn't expect his voice to be so tense. "All right," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Where?" We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop in Lincoln Park, a quiet spot with little foot traffic. When I walked into the shop, Peter was already there looking like a ghost. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled and his eyes red like he hadn't slept. He didn't greet me, just slid a small box across the table. "Open it," he said, his voice hoarse. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a USB drive and a stack of photos. I frowned, confused. "I checked that drawer," Bobby Peter said, his voice almost a whisper. "And I wish I hadn't." It turned out Susan hadn't just kept her old habits, she'd upgraded them. The USB contained new videos recorded in recent months, showing Susan continuing her secret lifestyle. But this time it wasn't just Sarah or the tennis coach. There were other men, some looking like Peter's business associates, and some videos were filmed right in his luxury Gold Coast apartment. The photos were printouts of texts between Susan and a man named Mark, apparently Peter's best friend. In the texts, Susan called Peter a long-term investment and planned to get him to propose, so she could secure his assets before continuing to have fun with Mark. I looked at Peter, and for the first time I felt an odd sense of empathy. "I thought she loved me," he said, his voice breaking. "She said you were a terrible husband, that you neglected her, that she had to find joy elsewhere. But now, I see she's a liar." I nodded, saying nothing. I'd been in his shoes believing Susan's lies, and I knew how it felt when your world collapsed. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Peter stared at the table, gripping his coffee mug. "I ended the engagement. I can't be with someone like that. But I want her to pay Bobby, like you made her pay." That's when I realized my story with Susan wasn't truly over. Peter wanted my help not just to deal with Susan, but to expose Mark, who'd betrayed his friendship. I wasn't sure I wanted to dive deeper into this drama, but a part of me, the part still angry at what Susan had done, wanted to ensure she couldn't hurt anyone else. "All right," I said, "but we need to do this right. I know someone who can help." I called Ted Worth, my lawyer and best friend. Ted had semi-retired after making a fortune from my lawsuits. But when I told him about Peter and what we'd found, he jumped right back in. "Bobby, you're a magnet for trouble." He laughed over the phone. "But this sounds juicy. Bring Peter to my office tomorrow morning." The next morning we met Ted at his old office, now converted into a smaller but still upscale legal consulting space. Peter brought the USB and photos, and Ted reviewed them with the glee of a lawyer smelling blood. "This is gold," Ted said, pointing to a video showing Susan and Mark in Peter's office, using the company computer to send personal emails. "If Mark is an employee or partner of yours, Peter, we can sue for breach of professional ethics. And Susan, she could be sued for emotional fraud, especially if you spent money on her based on engagement promises." Peter nodded, revealing he'd bought Susan a $50,000 engagement ring, paid her apartment rent, and even invested in a business project she called her passion. Ted grinned. "Oh, we'll make them regret this." But Ted also warned that this could get messy. "Susan knows how to manipulate, and she won't sit quietly. She might counterattack, accuse you or Bobby of slander. We need more evidence." Ted suggested hiring a private investigator to track Susan and Mark to see if they were still involved and if Susan was deceiving anyone else. Peter agreed to fund it, and I, though reluctant, agreed to help by providing insight into Susan's habits, things I knew like the back of my hand. The investigator, a sharp woman named Karen, worked fast. Within a week, she sent back a report that stunned both Peter and me. Susan wasn't just still seeing Mark. She was also in contact with Jeff Davis, the former boss fired after my lawsuit. It turned out Jeff had started a small real estate firm in Milwaukee and hired Susan as an independent consultant. But Karen discovered this consulting involved Susan meeting Jeff's investors at luxury hotels, repeating exactly what she'd done 3 years ago. Karen also found emails between Susan and Jeff where she called Peter the next big fish and planned to bleed him dry before moving to a new target. I couldn't believe it. After everything, Susan hadn't changed. She was still a predator using her looks and charm to manipulate men. But this time she'd picked the wrong opponents. Peter, though heartbroken, was now determined. He wanted to sue Susan for financial fraud and Jeff for complicity. Ted agreed we had a strong case, but wanted to play a bigger move. "We're not just suing," Ted said. "We're going to expose this whole network. If Jeff's running a company using Susan to lure investors, that's illegal. We can take them both down." Ted contacted a friend at the district attorney's office, who agreed to look into the case if we provided enough evidence. Karen kept digging, and what she found next was a genuine shock. It turned out Susan and Jeff weren't just working together, they were running a secret club for wealthy investors. Parties were held at a mansion in suburban Lake Forest, where Susan and a few other women were hired to entertain clients. Karen even recorded footage from one party showing Susan and Jeff greeting a group of men, some of whom were prominent figures in Chicago's business scene. I felt both disgusted and amazed. Susan hadn't just betrayed me and Peter, she'd built an entire system to exploit others. But Karen's footage also revealed a detail that chilled me. In a corner of the party, I recognized Sarah, Susan's best friend, who'd appeared in the old DVDs. Sarah wasn't just participating, she seemed to be an organizer, coordinating the women and guests. I realized this network was bigger than I'd thought, and Susan was just a part of it. Ted decided we needed a bold plan to bring this group down. He suggested staging a fake party, a trap to gather more evidence. Peter, as a potential investor, would be invited to the Lake Forest mansion. Karen would set up audio and video recorders, and I thought Reluctant would pose as a guest to ensure Susan didn't get suspicious. I didn't want to face her again, but I knew this was a chance to end her behavior for good. The night of the party arrived, and I felt like I was walking into a spy movie. The Lake Forest mansion was stunning, with luxury cars lining the driveway and twinkling lights from the windows. I wore a suit, sunglasses, and tried to blend in. Susan was there, dazzling in a red dress, laughing with guests. She didn't recognize me at first, probably because I'd changed so much in 3 years. But as I got closer, pretending to chat with another investor, her eyes locked onto me. I saw her freeze, her smile fading. "Bobby," she whispered, her voice trembling. I smiled, staying calm. "Hello, betrayer. Long time no see." Before she could react, Peter walked in, drawing Jeff and Sarah's attention. Karen, posing as a server, had set up cameras everywhere. The party went as planned, with Susan and Sarah trying to charm guests, while Jeff pitched his investment opportunities. But then, as Ted predicted, things got dramatic. One of the investors, who turned out to be Peter's friend, recognized Susan from a prior scandal. He shouted, accusing her of fraud, and the room descended into chaos. Susan tried to run outside, but Karen had alerted the police, who arrived as the party fell apart. Jeff, Sarah, and Susan were arrested on the spot for suspected illegal activities. Peter and I stood in the yard watching the police take them away. He grabbed my hand, his voice choked. "Thank you, Bobby. Without you, I'd never have known the truth." I nodded, but inside I felt empty. I'd won, but the cost was steep. The incident became major news in Chicago. Local papers dubbed it the Lake Forest scandal, with detailed articles on how Susan and Jeff used lavish parties to lure investors. Sarah, it turned out, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors for a lighter sentence, spilling every detail of their operation. I felt a bit of satisfaction, but also exhaustion. I just wanted to leave it all behind and move on. Then my doorbell rang. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I saw a young woman about 20 with long brown hair and anxious eyes. She wore a thin coat clutching an envelope. "Are you Bobby Thomas?" she asked, her voice shaky. I nodded, feeling a wave of unease. "I'm Emily. I think we need to talk. About Susan." My heart skipped a beat. Susan. A part of me wanted to slam the door. Emily sat on the couch, still gripping the envelope. She took a deep breath and started talking. "I'm Mark's daughter, the guy Susan was seeing behind Peter's back. My dad. He hasn't been himself since this all came out. He told me about you, how you helped Peter uncover the truth. But there's something you don't know." She opened the envelope, pulling out a stack of papers and another USB. "Susan wasn't just deceiving my dad and Peter. She was manipulating my whole family, and I think she's planning to get revenge on you." A chill ran down my spine. Revenge. I thought Susan was powerless to hurt me anymore, but clearly I'd underestimated her. Emily explained that after her arrest, Susan was bailed out by an expensive lawyer, someone Emily suspected was one of her old clients. While out on bail, Susan contacted Mark, convincing him that I was behind all their troubles. She told Mark I'd deliberately ruined her reputation, and if he helped her deal with me, she'd ensure he regained his standing in the business world. But the most shocking part was what was on the USB. Emily had hacked her dad's email, an act she admitted was illegal, but she was desperate. The USB contained messages between Susan and a man named Victor, a known thug from Chicago's South Side. In the messages, Susan asked Victor to teach Bobby a lesson in exchange for a large sum and personal services from her. She even sent Victor my apartment address and daily schedule, which she'd gotten from an old acquaintance at my company. I looked at Emily, trying to stay calm, but inside I was burning. Susan didn't just want revenge. She wanted to destroy me completely. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Emily lowered her head. Her voice choked. "Because my dad was wrong to betray Peter, but he doesn't deserve to be manipulated by Susan like this. And I don't want you, an innocent person, to get hurt just because of her. I lost my mom to drama like this. I don't want to lose my dad, too." I felt an unexpected respect for Emily. She was young but brave, and she was risking a lot to help me. I called Ted immediately, filling him in. Ted, as usual, stayed cool. "Bobby, you live in a soap opera," he said, but his tone was more serious than usual. "Bring Emily to my office now. We need to move fast." Emily and I drove to Ted's office, and on the way she told me more about her family. It turned out Mark was once a successful businessman, but after getting involved with Susan, he lost most of his wealth to Jeff's fake investment schemes. Susan had exploited Mark's desperation to turn him against Peter, and now she was using him as a pawn in her revenge against me. At the office, Ted reviewed the papers and USB, his face growing tenser. "This is a blackmail conspiracy, and possibly a threat to your life," he said. "We need to contact the police, but first we have to protect you." Ted called Karen, the PI, who helped us in the Lake Forest case, and asked her to track Victor. He also reached out to his friend at the DA's office, requesting a new investigation into Susan based on Emily's evidence. But Ted didn't stop there. He had a bolder idea, another trap, this time targeting Susan herself. "If she's trying to hire Victor to hurt you, we can make her expose herself," Ted said. His plan was for me to appear at a predictable public event, a charity fundraiser in downtown Chicago, where my old company often sponsored. Karen would pose as a journalist, approach Susan, and pretend to know about her plan with Victor. If Susan panicked and revealed anything, we'd have more evidence to take her to court. I wasn't sure about the plan. Facing Susan again was the last thing I wanted, and the thought of her hiring someone to harm kept me up at night. But I trusted Ted, and I knew if we didn't stop Susan, she'd keep hurting others. So I agreed. The night of the fundraiser came, and I felt like I was walking into a dangerous chess game. The event was held at a luxury hotel in the Loop, with glittering chandeliers and guests in formal attire. I wore a tuxedo trying to act natural, but my heart was pounding. Karen, in her journalist role, blended into the crowd. She spotted Susan. Immediately, she was in a tight black dress, chatting with a group of older men, clearly trying to charm them. I kept my distance, but I could see Susan's eyes scanning the room like she was looking for someone. Then she saw me. For a moment, our eyes locked, and I saw a flash of anger in hers. But she didn't approach, maybe because she knew I wasn't the manipulable Bobby anymore. Karen moved quickly. She approached Susan, introducing herself as an investigative reporter from the Chicago Tribune, and said she was writing about suspicious activities tied to the Lake Forest case. I heard you're working with someone named Victor. Karen said, her tone calm but sharp. Are you planning something with Bobby Thomas? Susan went pale but quickly regained composure. I don't know what you're talking about, she replied, her voice shaky. If you want an interview, contact my lawyer. But Karen pressed. I have sources saying you paid Victor to threaten Bobby. If you want to tell your side before it hits the papers, now's the time. Susan started to panic. I could see it in the way she gripped her wine glass. That's slander, she shouted, drawing attention from nearby guests. Bobby's a liar, and I won't let him ruin me again. Then, as if losing control, she blurted, if Victor does anything to him, it's what he deserves. That was all we needed. Karen had recorded the entire conversation, and an event security guard prearranged by Ted quickly escorted Susan out. The police were called, and Susan was detained on the spot for threatening and conspiring to harm. But the drama didn't end there. When the police searched Susan's purse, they found a secret phone, not her usual one, but a prepaid burner. On it, they discovered messages not only with Victor, but also with someone else, Harry Riel, the former owner of the Ace Tennis Club. It turned out, Harry, after losing millions in my lawsuit, had been secretly communicating with Susan to plot revenge. He not only funded her plan, but introduced her to Victor, who'd worked for him in shady deals. Messages between Susan and Harry showed they'd planned to target not just me, but also Ted for masterminding my successful lawsuits. They even discussed spreading false rumors about Ted to ruin his reputation in Chicago's legal community. I couldn't believe Susan's level of malice. She didn't just want to harm me. She was going after my best friend, who'd always had my back. Ted, when he heard, just smirked. Bobby, I've dealt with guys like Harry my whole career. But Susan, she's really something. He immediately contacted the prosecutor, providing the new evidence to expand the investigation. Harry was summoned, and though he initially denied everything, he grumbled when confronted with the messages from Susan's phone. Meanwhile, Susan tried one last move. From jail, she contacted a local reporter claiming Peter and I had entrapped her, that all evidence against her was fabricated. She even cried on TV, saying she was a victim of a smear campaign I'd orchestrated because I couldn't handle the divorce. Some people believed her, especially those who only knew her through her charming exterior and sweet voice. For a few days, I was the target of online whispers. A few ex-posts called me a bitter ex-husband and demanded justice for Susan. I felt stabbed in the back again. I tried to do right, but Susan still managed to paint me as the villain. Dad has always stayed calm. She's trying to deflect, he said. But we have evidence, and the truth always wins. He organized a small press conference where Peter, Emily, and I shared our story publicly. Emily, with incredible courage, spoke about how Susan manipulated her father and destroyed her family. Peter revealed the financial and emotional toll he'd suffered. And I just told the truth about the night I found Susan's betrayal, the videos and emails, and how she continued to harm others. The press conference was a turning point. Public opinion shifted, and articles began focusing on Susan's manipulation rather than her victim narrative. Victor, facing prosecution, agreed to testify against Susan and Harry for leniency. He admitted Susan paid him $10,000 up front, with promises of more if he got rid of me from Chicago, whether by intimidation or worse. Victor's testimony, combined with the burner phone evidence, was the final blow. Susan, Jeff, and Harry's trial lasted months, but the outcome was inevitable. Susan was sentenced to 5 years in prison for a fraud conspiracy to harm and running illegal activities. Jeff got 7 years for his leadership role in the network. Harry, despite a good lawyer, received 3 years for complicity and funding Susan's plan. Sarah, thanks to her early cooperation, got probation and community service. After the trial, I felt like a long chapter of my life had finally closed. I met Emily once more to thank her. She said her dad Mark was in rehab trying to rebuild his life, and she hoped to mend their family. Peter moved to California saying he needed a fresh start. And I kept living in Chicago, but with a new perspective. I started working with a nonprofit helping people who'd been emotionally betrayed, sharing my story so they'd know they weren't alone. But sometimes on quiet nights I still think about Susan. Not because I love her. That love died long ago. But because I wonder what made her this way. Was she always a manipulator? Or did something in her life push her down this path? I don't have answers, and maybe I don't need them. What matters is, I learned you can't control others' actions, but you can control how you respond. I chose to stand up, fight, and not let Susan's foolish habits define me. My story is a warning, but also a reminder. If you're in a relationship, pay attention to the small signs, habits, secrets. And if you're betrayed, remember you're stronger than you think. Gather evidence, find support, and never let anyone take your worth. I did it, and you can too. Finally, as the trial's spotlight faded, I stood outside the courthouse in downtown Chicago, watching the flow of people on the street. A cold wind blew, carrying the scent of fall, and a strange feeling like I'd just walked out of a years-long storm. Susan, Jeff, Harry, and their web of deception had been exposed. Sentences were handed down, and for the first time in a long while, I felt I could breathe without carrying the pain of the past. But this story doesn't end with revenge or victory. It ends with a lesson I want to share with you, those who've patiently listened to me until the very end. In the end, I realized life isn't about avoiding wounds, but about how you heal and rise. Susan destroyed our marriage, but she didn't destroy me. I reclaimed my life not just through lawsuits or the money I received, but through how I chose to live afterward. I started working with a Chicago nonprofit, helping those betrayed in love. I share my story at workshops in rooms full of strangers, and each time I see them nod, cry, or hold hands, they see themselves in my story, and I find strength in helping them find their light. One evening, months after the trial, I received a letter from Emily, the young woman who changed everything by showing up at my door. She wrote that her dad Mark was in a recovery program and trying to rebuild his life. She thanked me not just for helping save her father, but for giving her hope that truth could prevail. At the end of the letter, she included a photo of herself standing in front of a university in Wisconsin where she'd just been accepted. Her smile in that photo is something I'll never forget, a reminder that even in darkness there are sparks of light. As for Peter, he sent me a short email from San Francisco saying he'd found peace in morning runs along the coast. He didn't mention Susan, but he said he'd learned to trust again, not in others but in himself. I smiled reading that because I understood. Trusting yourself is the first step to healing. As for Susan, I heard she tried writing me from prison, but I never opened her letters. Not because I'm angry. I let go of anger long ago, but because I don't need her explanations or apologies anymore. She chose her path and I chose mine. Her foolish habits, deception, manipulation, greed, dragged her down, but I didn't let them drag me with her. Now as I walk Chicago's streets, I no longer look back with pain. I see a city full of opportunity, full of people fighting their own battles. And I know deep down that I'm stronger than I ever thought. My story isn't about a man betrayed. It's about a man who found the strength to rise, face the truth, and help others do the same. So if you're watching this video, I want to leave you with one final message. You deserve honesty, true love, and a life not defined by someone else's deception. If you're betrayed, gather evidence, find support, and never stop believing you can rewrite your story. Don't let anyone's habits destroy your dreams. Stand up like I did and turn pain into strength. Thank you for joining me through this long story. If it touched you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell me your own story. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories, life lessons, and ways to overcome adversity. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, and always remember, you are stronger than you think.